Anyone on the phone? Not yet. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the January 24th, 2022 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. We have, looks like Joel and Brian are just stepping up. Right now we're missing Kurt and DJ. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the Chamber of Commerce property request. Aaron?
Well, good morning, Mayor, Council members. It's a pleasure seeing you again. I know we just saw each other on Saturday and just got done with strategic planning. We'll end up providing a report to Council and the community shortly on the outcome of that. But today's presentation from me is to follow up on a request from the Chamber of Commerce for a donation of property. This is a piece of property that is currently known as the North Welcome Center from the Chamber of Commerce, located on 1995 Northwest Vine Street. Here is a picture of the, I'm sure you all know what it looks like there, but it's on the corner there of 6th Street. And it shares a lot. This is currently a city lot. It is zoned real market value of $257,000. It's 0.42 acres. The zoning is general commercial. The chamber has placed and has a long-term lease with the city for the property, for the use of the property. And what they've done is they've with their own investment, put a building, a structure on there, real market value of $205,000. They utilize that as their central office and as a welcome center. We do contract with the chamber also to provide welcome center operations at that site. One of the things that's unique about this site, and one of the reasons why it is a city-owned property currently right now, is originally that property was utilized because of some current water infrastructure. Current, and when I say current, it is also current and future. We see that there will always be a need for some water infrastructure on a portion of this property, which is highlighted here in blue. There is a pump station where the bears sit on. If you may recall, there's a larger concrete rectangle box there, and that's our pump station. So if the city was looking at wanting to donate the property or sell the property or whatever you deem appropriate for the chamber, one of the things that we would want to consider is some kind of continued ownership or rights for the north section of that property for our water infrastructure. So there's a number of options for you to consider today based on the request. Again, the request is the chamber has asked that you donate the property to them. You can provide direction to gift the property to the chamber. And if we did something along those lines, we would ask that council have a consideration of a partition of the north section or an easement for the north section for city infrastructure. You can provide direction to acquire on the chamber's desire to purchase the property. And then if that was the case, we would need to determine the value. Do you do that through appraisal? Would it be a partial or full sale? And then also the partition aspect of it, what we would do with that. And provide direction to maintain ownership, or you can also provide direction to maintain ownership of the property. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Just to get you up to speed on the request from the chamber, Josie is also present today, and so she can speak for the chamber if you have questions.
Go ahead, Rob.
So, Aaron, on slide 4, I guess it says real market value is $257,000, and it says real market value of improvements 205.
Yeah.
So that basically we're looking at 462 or something like that for what's
Yeah,
there?
I didn't add it together,
Right.
but yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Aaron before we have Josie come up? Rick?
Aaron, it was my understanding, did the chamber pay for the construction of the building? So they actually own the building on our property?
They do own the building, that's correct, and they're responsible for maintenance of the building. We do not have any maintenance responsibilities for the building.
So if we were to negotiate a price, we don't really have any legal possession of the 205, we only have legal possession of the land.
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
We're just talking about real market, real property of the property itself, yeah.
Joel?
I had a question for Josie.
Okay, well, we're going to have Josie come up and
We're not
present.
there yet? Okay. Okay, hold on.
Any other questions for Aaron at the moment? All right, Josie, please come up and, oh, did you have something, Valerie?
Yeah, I did have a question because it goes back to the fact that they have a building on that property that belongs to the city. So would we be able to sell that piece of the property with a building they own on it? I'm just kind of curious how that works.
You mean, would we be able to sell it to another party?
Well, that's what I'm thinking of, because you've got the market value at that, but would we really
Yeah.
be able to market it with a building that somebody else owns on the property?
So
That's my
this
question.
might be a question for Mark to help out with, but if we were to sell it, that we would have to sell it with the lease associated with the property, and the purchaser of the property, I'm guessing, would have to abide by the lease, or there could be a buyout on our end of the lease. I'm not sure about that.
To see some kind of a written agreement to demonstrate the chamber actually owns the building. I mean, typically, and that's an understatement to say typically, when you have real estate, any fixtures upon that real estate are all wrapped up into one. And so certainly a building is a fixture. It's permanently affixed to the land. And I do a lot of real estate, and it's extremely unusual, to say the least, to where the improvements are severed from the land. If they are inextricably linked, then you're right, that creates a real mess, because who's going to want to buy the land occupied by a building that you don't own?
And I just want to make clear too, currently you're saying that they manage all of the city does not have any, they take care of obviously the water part of it, but is it clear as to who maintains the property around
They maintain the structure, and then they also have landscaping responsibilities.
okay, thank you.
All right, hi, Josie. Oh, hang on just a moment. Rob, go ahead.
And the lease is for what term?
I will need to look that up.
Approximately? More than a year, 10 years?
Oh, yeah, it's more than 1 year. It's a long-term lease, but I don't have the date in my head.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Hi, Josie.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
What would you like us to know before we ask questions?
Well, I would just like to kind of talk about, right now we are in, I guess, a lifelong lease. There's no end date on the agreement that we've received. And we've been in this agreement since 1996, and we have covered all the costs for landscaping, everything with the property. We actually even pay property taxes for both the land and the building. So we have maintained the full facility, and we want to continue to invest in that property. We see it as our home forever, and we have had some problems with vandalism, homeless, and it has caused some problems since there's a lot of confusion, since the property is actually owned by the city. We own the building. So for efficiency and operation, it just makes more sense to us as the chamber to take full ownership of the land as well. And I would gladly take any questions anyone has.
All right, questions. Joel had something.
So Josie, what I was thinking, I'm thinking in terms of the margin, the difference between owning the property and a long-term lease. Both have the ability to invest in capital, and under both scenarios, you have to take care of the landscape and the buildings, so there's no difference there between the two. In terms of the assets of the city and the taxpayers, there would be a difference. Regardless of which alternative we take, we value the Chamber of Commerce, and they do a great job. So what is the marginal benefit to the Chamber of Commerce over the long-term lease versus owning the property, you have to pay property taxes instead of the lease. I'm not sure how that economically breaks out. But I don't see the advantages to the chamber, which would benefit the citizens of Grants Pass.
So for us at the Chamber of Commerce, we look at as we would invest more to the property if it was actually under our name. As you know, we're governed by a board of 15, and then we have over 600 members, which all have a say in what direction we go. And for them, it's hard to throw all this money if we want to, invest a large amount of money into something that's not actually in our name. So for them, and I mean the whole community, if we were able to invest more money into it, it would help everyone. And I think we have shown that we're committed to this community. And also, it would also benefit us a lot. Currently, we have a lot of homeless and transients that come onto the property. And since it's technically city property, there are quite a few that when our security comes around, that they will not leave. And we've seen a lot of vandalism lately. And so if we were actually a privately owned lot, we would have more authority to deal with that issue.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Josie. So you mentioned wanting to maybe in the future do some investment in the property. Do you guys have anything in mind? Is this just something, that hasn't been really discussed with specifics yet? Because if there are any specifics, I'm sure we'd be interested in hearing them.
So I'm sure all of you have been up there. The whole area just needs kind of a whole remodeled. It's kind of, it's been maintained, it looks nice, but we want to become more modern. There's also the kiosk area that we want to completely remove and put in a better outside kiosk. And we're actually looking at maybe doing a digital option. Those are just some things that we have thrown around, but it just needs modernized, really. And we would like to do that.
And it's easier for you as the chamber to do that if you own the land, or I'm just not seeing the connection with owning the land and being able to do those things easier.
So it would be much easier for our board of directors to see putting in a lot of money if we actually owned it. Because when you're trying to negotiate with 15 different viewpoints, they would like it to be under our ownership if we're going to put in a lot of money. So to get them on board and actually move forward with a strategic planning session, what we want it to look like, it would be much easier if it was under our ownership.
Okay, thanks.
Rob?
Yes.
Yeah, has the board discussed making an offer to purchase the property?
So we knew that could be an option. So yes, we have talked about it.
So just as a possible option, is the way it is?
Yes, we just knew that could be a possible option to be thrown out on the table. They have not made any decision on if they would go for that or not.
And I don't remember, you said that's been the home of the chamber since '96? Mm-hmm. Where was the chamber before that?
I think it was down the road at that orthodontist shop on 6th Street, just a little ways down the road.
Thank you.
And they just rented that. They did not own the building.
Any other questions at the moment? Brian?
Well, I just have a question for staff. That the details of that lease are pertinent to the conversation as far as length, so if we have any info.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think they're highly pertinent, and it may be correct that the chamber does on the improvements, but frankly, I'm skeptical of that. I'm going to guess what there is what's called a ground lease, and the hallmark of a ground lease is that the lessee, or otherwise known as a tenant, is entitled to build significant improvements, but upon termination of the lease, the landlord owns all the improvements that were made there. that would be far more common than what was described earlier. But we need to find that out. And I think that that's probably pretty highly relevant in the council's calculus of decision-making here.
All right, any other questions at the moment? Joel?
And again, this is for staff. So if we have what'd you call the length of that lease, Josie?
So the lease, how we've read it, there's no end date.
There's no end
It's
date on the
only
lease.
if we default.
Only
that it
if you
goes
default,
back.
okay. So is there any differences between owning the property and having a lifelong lease with no default on terms of the ability of either the tenant or the landowner to make improvements from a city's perspective? Is there any difference between those two?
If what he's saying, the lease, that no, whatever improvements they put on it, or whatever they do, when the lease ends, it all goes to the city, according to what Mark said, if it's a...
Right, so as long as they don't default, then I have a hard time understanding with
Yeah.
your mask. But as long as they don't default, then there's no difference between the two, is my understanding.
I think, but why would they
All right.
invest?
We need some more information, I think, obviously, about the, specifics of the lease and what's required there. Do you have something, Aaron, or should we wait for a future date?
If you'd like, if Josie wants, you can table this till the end of the meeting today, and we're gathering the lease right now. We thought we had it, but we've got to pull it up from the computer.
I have a copy if you want it.
Or we
Okay.
can reschedule for another time.
Okay, should we move on to a different topic for a while, and we'll come back to this at the end?
Can I add just a little bit more before we move
Okay.
on? I do want to add another thing that is very hard to work with our current lease. It makes, if we make any changes to landscape, which I know Aaron has been very great to work with, but we're actually have to send him a written letter asking to trim the trees, trim the bushes. So I know Aaron doesn't require that, but going forward, we might have a city manager. So items like that in the agreement make it very hard for us to be a functional business. So I just wanted to add that.
I've spoken with Aaron about that, and I know his interpretation of that is that general maintenance wouldn't be requiring any sort of request, but perhaps if you were to rearrange the landscaping, that is maybe more the intent rather than just mowing the lawn. Rick has a question.
I have a question for staff. As a matter of procedure, if council wants to get into discussion of financial aspects of this, would that not be in executive session, or will we have it in open public?
That would be fair game for executive session if the council so chooses.
All right, council, well, I think let's give Aaron and Mark some time to review the lease there, and we'll come back at this after the Allenwood property. Is that fair game? All right, thank you. Also, just note for the record, we do have Kurt on the phone listening in today, and DJ is is absent today. All right, next up, how about pool funding options? And I do not have a presentation slides. Aaron is handing them out. Thank you, Aaron.
And I'm not sure if Jason is there to enlarge the screen for me.
He is, Adam, and we're just handing out some paperwork.
I'm looking for the button, Adam.
We gotta get both ties like that. What do you think?
I think that's it. You should have control.
Yeah. All right. I think you should be able to see me now.
We see the pool funding slide and your little photo up there in the corner.
Wonderful. Well, good morning. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to provide some information on pool funding today. The subject in summary is to present you with those options and then ideally get some direction from Council on which options you'd like us to pursue. The relationship to Council goals is to maintain, operate, and expand our infrastructure to meet community needs, specifically to ensure that park infrastructure needs are met. The first funding option that we have is from the Urban Renewal Agency. The URA plan currently has $5 million allotted towards a new pool. Specifically, that will include but not be limited to a pool vessel, mechanical building, changing rooms, and concession area. So some fairly broad use on what we can use those funds for, specifically for a pool. One challenge with this funding, as was mentioned in strategic planning, is that the current site is not currently in the urban renewal area, so that would have to be added first. Another challenge with this would be the timing of the URA funds, in that right now we don't have $5 million to contribute to a pool project. Based on the current rate of revenues, it would take us until about fiscal year 2024 or fiscal 2025 to raise that amount of funds, and that is with absolutely no contributions to any other projects, including contributions to debt service for the water treatment plant, which is very much part of the rate adjustments that were recently made. So what that would really mean is bringing up the need to issue Urban Renewal Agency debt, which would then be collateralized by future revenues of the Urban Renewal Agency. Aside from that, the other URA option we have is to reprioritize projects that currently have URA dollars in them. Now, I say currently, but I want to be very sure to state, and as you'll see the little disclaimer at the top, that all the balances I'm providing today are as of June 30th, 2021. So that does not reflect any fiscal year 2022 activity, either revenues or expenditures. We'd have to dive deeper into certain projects to see exactly how much funds are left. So that's the list of projects you see in the bottom right-hand corner are projects with URA dollars as of June 30th. 2021. Another option would be to use American Rescue Plan Act funds, our ARPA dollars. The guidance has recently come out, and it's quite a lengthy document, so we're continuing to research and seek guidance on different ideas that we have for use of ARPA and how eligible they would be. At the moment, potential justifications would be for the expansion of outdoor recreational opportunities. However, something I just learned in the last week is that justification must be for a qualified census tract, so it might not necessarily qualify for where the current pool site is. Another option could be for the expansion of tourism by hosting tournaments at a new pool facility or swimming competitions. Something to consider with that is that if you're going to build a facility grand enough to host tournaments or competitions, you're also likely increasing the cost of the project versus just building the facility that only meets the needs of the local community. So something to consider there. Another item with using ARPA dollars is that ARPA funds must be obligated by December of 2024 and must be spent by December 2026. So in the scenario where you're using a combination of funds, URA, for example, if we were to save URA funds for several years, that would likely put us up against that deadline of having to spend the ARPA dollars if we were to use them in conjunction with each other. So timing is important of how quickly we move on a project like this if we're to use ARPA dollars. Other options would include park development, system development charges. So we have parkland acquisition and park development SDCs. For those park development SDCs, we have $120,000 that was unallocated as of June 30th. And then the LB 6377 West Home Park had $98,500 sitting in there as of June 30th. Another option could be to use lodging taxes for parks acquisition and development. This is the part of the lodging taxes that goes to the LB fund that can be for park acquisition or development and tourism-related facilities, but it doesn't have to be a tourism-related facility. With that in mind, there are $147,000 of those funds unallocated as of June 30th, and then below is the list of projects that had unspent lodging tax funds as of June 30th. The next item, and this list is a lot longer, but that would be to reprioritize land and building projects that currently have discretionary funds within them. Don't have a lot of additional insight to provide other than to remember that some of these projects may have had activity in this year, so those funds might not be there as of today, but it would essentially be an exercise of identifying which projects either have too much funding or should not continue in order to divert those funds to pool funding. Another opportunity would be to look at bonded debt. Using a $5 million principal amount at a 12-year repayment schedule, that would be an average of around $540,000 of debt service per year. That's both principal and interest repayment. And in order to supplement that additional expenditure, that'd be about the equivalent of an additional tax rate of 16 cents per assessed value. This estimate is all based on a similar general obligation bond that we did back in 2007 for the public safety general obligation bond. That was $9.8 million instead of $5 million. Some other interesting points to note would be that that levy passed 53 to 46%, and then our most recent experience would be with the public safety levy of $1.89, which was an increase of only 10 cents, and that failed 46 to 53%. Moving on to some of the more assured funding sources, we are constantly looking for grant funding. Part of that is that you're going to need to know what you're looking for so that you can see which grants apply to you. So we're constantly looking for that. We don't have a specific dollar amount of exactly how much grant funding could support a pool project. Then we also have LB 8580, which is the community building project. And I wanted to call this one out specifically because at the moment it has $250,000 that was originally believed to be restricted specifically for a community building. However, as outlined in the memo from June 30th, there's nothing that legally restricts it to that. It was just a set of minutes from 1983 that stated that the proceeds from the sale of 4th and L Street property to Sally Duckworth would be committed to, or would be used for a community center. But that didn't get legally stated anywhere. However, allocating those available funds to something with a similar community purpose could be within the same spirit of the original intent. And finally, I suppose the best news is that LB 6393, which is the restore and replace caveman pool, currently has $280,000 as of June 30th, so we don't have to find those funds. They are currently set aside. And the call to action is to ask council to let us know which of these options, some are certainly more complicated than others, with which ones you'd like us to pursue, and you can do that today or at your discretion. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Council, questions? Valerie, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about I know you talked about the ARPA funds. It says must be for qualified census tract. Can you explain to me what exactly do you mean about that?
There you go. Yeah, not every acreage of land qualifies as a census tract. I believe it has to do with the median income level of a certain area. So we would have to be increasing recreational opportunities to an area of the city that was previously underserved. in a lower than medium income area. There's certainly more details to that. I basically wanted to share those challenges because using ARPA funds for pool funding is just not the same slam dunk as using it for the water treatment plant as far as allowable uses. So, but like I said, we're still in the process of reviewing all of the documentation to see if we could make that fit and for how much.
And going on that, you're saying that all the ARPA funds that need to be spent by December of 2026, correct?
That's correct.
And you were saying that if we were to use that and then as well use the ARPA as well as the URA, that we would have to, I didn't understand completely when you were saying the timing of it would be important. So can you explain that just a little bit for me?
Yes, so the scenario I was laying out would be if we wanted the URA to save $1 million every year until we had $4 million, and then use those $4 million plus maybe $1 million from ARPA. Because it's so many years down the road, by the time the URA had the available cash, we might not be able to start or finish the project in time to use the $1 million of ARPA funds. So that would also tie into needing to issue URA debt. So using ARPA funds just puts a timing restraint on any of the funds that would be used for this project.
Okay, so if we used the URA, so you're saying that if we used the URA funds, we'd have to take out a loan against it, is what you're saying, correct? I mean,
That's
that is a
correct.
possibility. Okay, and then you mentioned that there was some problem with that, as if we were to do and take that out. Can you explain that to me a little bit better?
Not necessarily a problem with that. It would just require us to look into issuing debt through the Urban Renewal Agency specifically for this pool. And then, of course, the debt service on that debt would restrict available resources and even other debt opportunities from the Urban Renewal Agency for other urban renewal projects as well.
So you're saying it would be harder to go in debt for something else if we had incurred the $5 million already for the pool. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Not necessarily harder, but you'd have fewer funds left in the Urban Renewal Agency to cover additional debt.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
Adam, so I'd like to call this, just to be realistic, since some of the figures are a little old and we're looking into the future, I'd like to call it a $7 million pool, just to be realistic. It doesn't change my position that I think we need a pool. But if we were to go into debt against future revenues of the district, let's just say it was a 10-year note or a 15-year note, based on today's interest rates, how much would that add to the total cost of this endeavor? So if we started out at $7 million and we needed to borrow, maybe it makes more sense for a longer term, but let's just say it was a 15-year payoff. What does that add to what this is going to cost us?
So unfortunately, there's a lot of variables that could go into what that would cost us, and I just used the $5 million as an estimate based on what was in the urban renewal plan. So the figures are essentially the same for the Urban Renewal Agency versus doing general fund bonded debt. On the screen you see there. So in this example, $5 million at 12 years, if you wanted to shorten that, then obviously the annual debt service would increase. It wouldn't, if you did a 6-year repayment schedule, it wouldn't quite double, but it'd be somewhere in the $900,000 per year range, I would say, with the current interest rates. And of course, adding principal to that has a similar relative effect on annual debt service.
So $900,000 a year for debt service if it was paid out over 6 years, based on $5 million borrowed. Is that right?
That's a very rough estimate, but
Rough
yes.
estimate. Thank you.
Any other questions? Brian?
Yeah, on this same slide, Adam, I just want to make sure I understand what bonded debt means when it's not in the urban renewal agency, when it's outside. Does that mean that we're essentially going to the voters and asking them to vote on a bond for this?
That's correct. Using that 2007 Public Safety General Obligation Bond, we issued debt, and I think I skipped over it in my summary, but what that meant was that we had an additional tax of 51 cents per thousand in 2008, and that tax rate then decreased to 23 cents per thousand in 2019 whenever the bond ended, and that is because as assessed values increased, the necessary rate to raise the additional funds to pay for the debt service was then decreased. So it would start, in the example above, I estimate it would start somewhere around 16 cents per thousand, and that rate would decrease every year as assessed values increased.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Joel?
So I was just thinking a question for staff. We have some cash available, about $530,000, or I'd have to go back and check the figures, from the different funds. And there's several unknowns with the pool, you know, what the cost is, that kind of thing. And the first step in this, if I remember correctly, is getting an engineering firm to give us options to then fully fund and start building. Is that correct? And I see Brad shaking his head yes. So there's at least two approaches to it, and there's probably more, and if there is more, please bring them up. We could have a two-phase approach where the first approach with the cash that we have on hand that doesn't seem to have a high opportunity cost, we fund the engineering firm and the study and options to flesh out what it's going to cost, because we have to do that anyway. And then at that point in time, when that comes back to us, we decide where we want to fund it, and it could be urban renewal or a levy. By that time, ARPA may be a foregone conclusion. Now that's one approach. I'm not sure that that's the approach we want to take. The other approach would be we make a decision today using ARPA funds and a combination of the other funds to, if that's what we want to do, to cover the full and get the engineering study started regardless. So I throw that out just to stimulate discussion.
All right, well, it appears we have just moved into the discussion phase, so go ahead, Valerie.
Yeah, my question was, how long are you talking about looking, is it going to take to, you know, if we have indeed made a decision to put it in the same spot, to go out and get it put into the urban renewal? So there's a certain amount of time frame that will take. So what are you talking time frame to bring it back into the urban renewal, if that's what we chose to do?
Brad, are you able to answer that question?
So that's not a very long process. You know, I haven't looked specifically at the URA rules on that, but I mean a couple of months at the most. We already have the map prepared that was presented to you in 2020. So it's really just a matter of, you know, going through the noticing process and doing that.
Yeah, that's correct. As a notice, you have to notify all the other taxing districts that would be, you know, potentially have impact associated with it. So probably no more than a 3-month process.
Brian, then Rick, then Rob.
So I agree with Joel. It seems like the funding conversation is a little bit premature when we don't even know how much the project's going to cost. It seems like the next step would be to put out an RFP for an engineer or a designer or whoever we need to get to put together a plan for that site, because that's the limiting factor here. That's the thing that's going to take the longest. So that's what we really need to be moving on first, is getting that process moving, because this is going to be a long process for the pool. And then maybe once we have an idea, a better idea of what the pool's going to cost, then maybe that's the time to start talking about how we're going to fund it. But it feels premature to talk about that.
Rick?
Also, in looking at the project costs, I'd like to know how many hours the pool's used for swim competition and how many hours it's used for public enjoyment, which would basically be the summertime. That could, if we, as further evaluation, if we see substantial costs, if there's some alternatives that would be available just because of the design or how the pool is used. But that would be a future information. Thank you.
Rob?
I agree with Brian's point that the first step is to essentially send out an RFP to be able to hire someone who's going to run the project for us and see how much it's going to cost. We're all committed to the project. We know we're going to do it. You know, the citizens want it, and we want it, you know, for them. So I think that's clearly the first step. You know, we know, I believe we all know that we don't want to do it in-house. We don't even have a parks director yet. So it's not a project that we want to have to supervise in-house in much the same way that we don't directly supervise the water treatment plant. We have consultants that do that. So I think that that's you know, that was a really good idea there. And I think it would be a good idea also here to get a consultant on board that's going to essentially run this project and give us accurate figures. One question that I suppose we could, you know, get answered at a much later date. I just want to throw that out here because it could affect some decisions in the nearer term. If I understood what Adam said before, roughly $5 million borrowed for 6 years would cost us $900,000 a year to carry that debt, if I understand correctly. Adam, was that an accurate figure?
It's, as I said, a rough estimate,
Roughly.
but that's correct.
Okay. So, and I'm sorry I'm not that good at even basic math. So if we were to essentially invest that amount of money into accelerating payments for the water treatment plant, what kind of return do we get on that? In other words, where does it make the most sense to potentially spend the ARPA money? Are we going to get a lot more bang for the taxpayer's buck with the water treatment plant, or by potentially using that same money for a pool and not paying those same interest rates to borrow money for the pool?
If I could answer that, you'd get a similar bang for your buck on savings by reducing the debt that you issue. The main difference would be contributing to the water treatment plant provides savings to the ratepayers in the long run versus reducing debt for a general fund project or an LB project like the pool would save money for the general fund. So it'd be, you know, somebody is paying for the debt. Is it the water ratepayers or is it taxpayers through the general fund? And do we have to prioritize how our available dollars are utilized in the services that we provide, or the levels of service we provide?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Valerie? I tend to agree with what's being said about moving forward with the engineering part of it and putting an RFP out there. I think, you know, in the process of doing that, it's important that we do talk with the high school. I think if you were to go back through the years and look at hosting champion, I mean, whatever it is, they do it all the time. And it's part of the whole thing is that Grants Pass has definitely been a host for many a tournament through the years. So I think that has proven that, yes, it is. And it would be, you know, I think just more research needs to be done. And so I think that gives Adam or whoever there the chance to do a little bit more research on exactly the use of ARPA funds. Because right now it's obviously unclear to me if those can be used, but I want to see that as definitely one of the primary options. So anyway, I'm in favor of going out for an RFP for the engineering to get something drawn up and something done with money that we have. I don't know what it would cost, whether it would entail giving more, but there's currently $280,000 in the pool upkeep, so I would think that we could use that to put that together.
Brian, then Joel, then Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to support Valerie's point about getting the school district on board as a partner in this project. I think that is very important. The school district is going to see huge benefits from having a new pool there, and I think it would be in their best interest to help fund that project. So I don't know if that's something council needs to start with or staff or how that happens, but I definitely think the school district is an integral partner on this project, especially if we're looking at doing a site that is available more than just in the summer months. If we're looking at some sort of covered site, the district definitely has an interest and a stake in that, so I think they'd be willing to contribute. And then just on the funding piece, no matter how we slice this, none of these other funding sources are going to be able to cover the whole cost the way the URA would. I could potentially see the funding being split out between maybe the URA and some other smaller sources, but I don't see a way for us to get this done that doesn't include the URA funding. So I would say that we probably need to go ahead and add that property to the URA when it's appropriate. And I also don't think it's appropriate to go out for a general obligation bond to the public on this. Thank you.
Joel, then Rick.
Well, I was just musing, that's an interesting word. I was musing, so we spend, we get an RFP, I don't know what they cost, but I would guess 500,000 would cover it. And it would, before, I know when we did the water treatment plant, we put out a contract for design and build, which was cheaper, if I remember that conversation, not just design. And then that would put us, regardless of what kind of contract we put out, then we're committed. The worst scenario would be we spend $500,000 and then we don't fund the pool. That would not be appropriate in my mind. And so we always got urban renewal dollars, I guess, as a last resort. The levy, I think people want the pool, and I think they're willing to pay for it. You know, things don't come free. It's easy for me to spend other people's money without their permission. You know, the other hand, if they really want to do something and get it done, so I wouldn't downplay the levy. I know Ashland did that, and they did it successfully. I'm not sure about Medford, but this will give us time, I guess, to figure out those funding sources. The only problem is that when we go out for the contract, will it be a design and build without those funding sources already identified, and that obligation on the part of the council, whoever they are at that time, to come up with those funds.
In continuation of that, I guess with the RFP, I don't know if it's possible or not, when we go out with specifics, can you also include, are there alternatives that might be less expensive? In other words, I guess when we go out, we're looking to see, do they want to repair or actually build a whole new facility? But is there some other ideas that might accomplish what we want to accomplish and yet not cost as much? Because sometimes the RFP or your request can be so focused, it doesn't allow the opportunity for other ideas. That's just a question. Thank you.
All right, it sounds like we have some support for pursuing an RFP, at least for the design. Does staff have any recommendation on the difference between a design and a design and build?
I think at this point, we'll want to put our heads together, maybe reach out to the city of Medford to see how they did theirs. We might want to do a design build. You're in that price range where a design build will likely save us some dollars, for sure. You want to be in the several $1 million range for that to work off. We'll still want to hire a consultant to help guide us, as Councilor Pell discussed. We're not in the swimming pool building business, so we'll want to get some assistance with that. So I would recommend that we reach out to others that have recent experience building a pool, find out what their approach was, and generate an RFP from there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Jason's right, that cost of what we're looking at is close to making sense for design build. The design build also provides for some additional flexibility in the design and the construction. And so you're not totally set in, okay, this is exactly what it's going to be as you're going through the process. And with the input from the community, things that might change from the school district, those kind of things, it might be good to have that flexibility through a design build process.
Joel?
So I was wondering, is the liaison to the school board an appropriate, to keeping them up to speed with what's going on? Does that seem like an appropriate thing, or do we need a communication in addition to that?
Well, I think that might be something that we could discuss as we move forward with the presentation. Right now, I think we've got clear direction. What we'll do is we'll provide you with a suggested next step when it comes to an RFP, what type of process and what that would look like, and bring it to you, and we can bring that to you at an upcoming business meeting with a background, et cetera. If we know that we're going to go that route and the consensus is we're doing an RFP, we can have something for you and schedule it for an upcoming business meeting.
Sounds good to me. Rob has a question.
So who currently owns the current pool, and who owns the property that the current pool is on?
That's the city. It's the city.
City owns both, the pool and that property.
Yeah,
It just happens to be next to the high school.
it just happens to be surrounded by the high
Thank
school.
you.
And they do use it a little bit for PE classes. We have some sort of arrangement for that.
Yes.
Brad?
I was going to say, closely related to this is the discussion about this upcoming season. And we have had some discussions with YMCA. As you know, they are responsible for operations, the concessions, lifeguards. And we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with them. I'm working with Chad and Matt Lund at the YMCA to bring to you a recommendation about this season. But I point that out in this topic because the $280,000 that's up there, as Adam mentioned, will likely not be there because there are some improvements to even operate this year that we're going to have to make related to safety. We did a little bit last year, but there's a few more. We're not talking big dollars, but I wanted to make sure you're aware of that. But I think it's an important piece of this topic because if the council wants to see the 2022 season operational, we need to give you an update on that.
Sounds good. Yeah, we will need to have another conversation about that and kind of a review of how things went last year as well. All right, it sounds like the group supports doing the RFP or coming back to us at least with a suggestion for that, so we will move along. How about the Allenwood property?
Mayor, would you like to go back to the chamber?
If you're ready now, that would be probably
Certainly.
welcome from Josie.
Yeah, so the lease was, as I expected, I would call it a ground lease. So the chamber does not own the improvements. However, for all intents and purposes, the city has very little residual right in that in the fixtures in the building. And the reason for that is that it's an indefinite term to this lease that only would terminate upon the default of chamber. And so, I mean, the lease does detail events of default. Most of them are quite unlikely, such as the chamber going into receivership, failure to pay lease payment, which I think is nominal. And so it's very unlikely ever to go into default. Any sale of that property would be subject to that lease on those terms too. So it is pretty well tied up for chamber use, I would say.
All right, council, thoughts on that? Do you want to continue? Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So essentially, Mark, we own the property. We essentially, if the property got sold, we would essentially own the building too, because it would go with the property. But we would only be able to sell it to someone who would be willing to honor the lease. So we kind of have a piece of property that we could never sell, essentially.
Yeah, there wouldn't be much market to purchase a
Right.
property encumbered by this lease, correct?
Right.
Any future buyer would step right in the shoes of the city. The
Right.
chamber could enforce the terms of the lease against the buyer.
Right, thank you.
Valerie? Yeah, my question, I mean, if we were to gift it to them, is there something in there that if they decided and if they went kaputz or whatever and then wanted to sell that property, that we would have the right to step in? I mean,
Yeah, so there's nothing in there right now because it's merely a lease, but if the city were to decide to convey that property, then my suggestion would be to put some sideboards on it. One way of doing that is called the Rite of Reentry.
okay.
And so it would be city conveys to the chamber so long as it's continued to be used as a chamber building. If it's not, then it automatically reverts to city ownership.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to at this point say that I'm in favor of gifting it to them for that reason. I think it's a huge support for our business organizations. And so to me, I would recommend that we gift it to them and put the sideboards on that just say if they were ever to sell it, we would have the first ability to buy.
Rick?
I would favor an executive session to discuss the different financial aspects of this. Thank you.
Further discussion? Joel?
Well, I need to think about it a little bit, and I need a little bit more time, and, because there's advantages and disadvantages to both. And so, rather than putting it on an agenda for a decision at this point in time, if we want to do it in an executive session, that would be fine, or another council workshop. But you know, to have this presented to me today and to make a decision today, I don't feel comfortable with that.
I am just going to remind you that it was brought to us months ago, and it was discussed, and we came to the point where we talked about putting the fence between the city water infrastructure and the city. So it was brought to us, and the only reason it was set that back was because Josie was on maternity leave, and so there was kind of that gap, but it was presented earlier.
Brian?
So just as a point of comparison, earlier this year, the county came to us to request the land over here across the street for the Children's Advocacy Center. You know, not exactly the same, but it was a similar request, and we did not honor that request, and the county came forward and paid for that land at market value. A similar request has come from the food bank. Again, not exactly the same, but a similar request, and from what I gather, we're probably not going to be moving forward with anything there. So I don't know with this particular example with the chamber what sets that apart from those other two examples where we would be wanting to gift $250,000 of value of ours. So I'm just unclear on why we would do that.
Rob?
I'd like to move forward and put this into an executive session as soon as possible where we can decide on it. I think we pretty much have the information we need, and I'd like to not leave them hanging one way or the other. So I think we should go to at some point in an executive session and make a decision.
All right, any further discussion for today? All right, we're going to put that on a future agenda. Thanks for being here today, Josie. And let's go back to Allenwood property.
Good afternoon. So the slides that I'm going to present to you are mostly the same. I did have a chance to make a couple of additions since we sent this out on Friday, which will hopefully be of benefit to the council and mayor. So this is to provide you a property profile, basically, of the Allenwood property and discuss some potential options related to affordable housing. And it relates to two of your council goals: facilitate sustainable and manageable growth, and to provide cooperative shared leadership involving council staff and the community. So this property is address 225 Allenwood Drive. It's referred to in a few different city documents as just the Allenwood property. There's a couple of inconsistencies in the numbers you might see here. I think some of that's because of sometimes we talk about just the largest parcel, which is the 8.67 acre, but the city does in fact own two other separate tax parcels that are just north of this. That one of those is 175 Allenwood, that's 0.7 acres, and then there's another one about 0.3 acres. So together, we're talking, about 9.5 acres. They're all currently zoned R18, and the comprehensive plan designates this as well as this whole area adjacent to Williams Highway there as low-density residential. And they are currently in the Allenwood Park Reserve, which I'll show you in a second here. So here, what's outlined in the blue is the larger, the 8.67 acre one, and then in the red here are the two others that are directly fronting on Allenwood Drive. The larger 8.67 acre fronts on Williams Highway, and then only if you were to extend the right-of-way of Allenwood down would it have frontage there. So we're talking about a half mile south of the intersection of New Hope and Williams Highway. So you can see on the inset here, Allendale Elementary School, which is on Allen Creek. Williams Highway runs there, and then New Hope takes off to the southwest, just below that point. So if you were to stay on Williams and go just about a half mile further south, and then on the west side of Williams, that's where this property is located. So how did the city come into ownership of this? All three parcels were part of a resolution in 2005 where the properties were all purchased together at one time for a little over $1 million. They were at that point owned by the Actuarial Pension Retirement Services Trust. And the purpose, if you look at the resolution, number 4913, they were intended to be for parkland development. And there was a conceptual plan that was prepared in 2007, including 21 space parking lot, had a playground, a dog park, picnic areas. Concept was prepared by a architect, a designer. There was a gentleman named Andy Margison who was very involved with the development of All Sports Park, who lives right in that neighborhood, Whispering Drive, who was very active at the time and in the advocacy of having a park there. There was also some concept of a connector street between Williams Highway and New Hope that would kind of go through this area. There was some petitions that went to kind of oppose that from the neighborhood. They wanted to see the park proceed. There was in the FY 2012 budget about $162,000 that was allocated to complete some preliminary work on it. This is the 2007 concept plan that was presented and sort of being floated around at that time. Williams Highway again being on the right-hand side here. Some of those features that I just mentioned in terms of open space and dog park. There's a lot of open space on the west side of the parcel. As we'll see in a second, that's where the majority of the wetlands are located. The city's adopted master parks plan does show the property as park reserve. And then in 2017, the demolition permit was issued for a house. There was actually originally 2 houses on the property. We couldn't find a permit for the one, but on the 8.67 acre, there was a demolition permit for that house in 2017. All 3 parcels are vacant today. Then in 2019, the PAVE committee that focused on 42 city-owned properties, there was a final report issued in November of 2019. It included Allenwood, these 3 Allenwood parcels in their list of recommended surplus properties. The committee did suggest, the PAVE committee suggested retaining a portion of the property adjacent to the wetlands, but that's about as far as the recommendation went, and some of the councilors were involved with that and probably know more than I do on that. This is a snapshot from the city's park master plan, the 2010 adopted park master plan, just kind of showing this southern portion of the city. You can see Cathedral here, Cathedral Hills here, very close to the property, owned by Bureau of Land Management, the Grants Pass Country Golf Club, and then the Allenwood Park Reserve. The other potential parkland in this area is the Allen Creek Reserve up off of Allen Creek Road. So at this point, there are no improved municipal park amenities in this part of the city, thus the reason for the reserves. We wanted to show you a little bit more detail on what's happening with the utilities out there. Again, this utility map, the green is a sewer line that does kind of bisect the property on the west side. There's some fall on the property. All of these elevations here kind of starts about 1844, goes down to about 1817. So there's some fall on the property from Williams going down towards the creek. There is a water main in Williams Highway that fronts the property. And then GPID has a facility along the western edge there as well. This map shows you the wetlands, the orange or I'm sorry, kind of gold color, or those are conservation wetlands, which is the highest classification that the state DSL puts on wetlands. There's a conservation buffer adjacent to that. So there's difficulty, shall we say, in developing, unless you go through a very expensive wetlands mitigation process. That's why I think you saw in the original concept from 2007, really no amenities on that end of the property. Most of them would be on this end, but there are no wetlands for about 3/4 of the property. So it's quite developable. There is some question as to what kind of access the Oregon Department of Transportation would grant on Williams Highway here. Allenwood Drive is just less than 200 feet to the north there. I did not have a chance to get a hold of their planner, Micah, to kind of see what their current would be, but that clearly would be one of the first points of due diligence would be to determine accessibility directly to Williams Highway. This slide shows some of the things I've already talked about: conservation wetlands, there's stormwater, open ditches, that perennial stream crosses the property. A traffic impact analysis, if any upzoning were to occur, that would be required. We would need to go through that process, similar to what we're going through with Allen Creek, as you know. So we have done a couple of rough kind of back of the napkin projections. What if the property was to be sold for housing? And this slide, we have kind of 3 different densities that we looked at. This slide here is the current zoning, the R18, And if you just took a gross of all 3 parcels together, the next 3 slides are just assuming all 3 parcels, not just the 8. You know, that 58 units, maximum potential units, that's not changing the zoning, that's not changing the comprehensive plan, using the 7,000 square foot lot size and the 6.2 dwelling units per acre, getting you around 58 units. Now, if it was upzoned to, say, an R32, we did skip over the 2 or 3 other zoning options. So this is just kind of jumping more into the multifamily, right up into the multifamily. You could potentially see 185 or more units. That would require, or that would be done under this lower lot sized 2,100 square feet, which that zone allows for 20 units per acre. And then the R42 option increases that even more with high density residential in the comp plan and 1,100 square foot lots and 34.8 units per acre. So there's many approaches the city council could take on this. The city does own all 3, as I mentioned. You could do a request for proposal for development of housing. There's also mixed income housing, similar, but kind of in an RFP would have a little different twist to it, or a combination of those both. Or, of course, the city could leave it as park reserve. If the property, if a portion of the property was sold, we would have to go through the process of doing a property line adjustment to break off some of that. So that would be somewhat of a cost to hire a surveyor and get that process done. No cost implications at this point. We're just giving you some background. The real market value is shown there, $651,000 for the 8.6 acre, $80,950 for the 0.7 and $8,000, little over $8,000 for the 0.38 acre. I did put this note in here, having talked with Connie. She did on another project, but she pointed out that these numbers, because they're city owned, the assessors don't get out there and regularly update those properties as often as they do other privately owned properties. So I think council's well aware of this. You've done appraisals, for instance, on the Nebraska property, and when you get up to this kind of value, that's probably a recommended way to go. So we know better what we're dealing with. In terms of other cost implications, the proceeds would have to go back to Parks Land Acquisition SDC Fund, since this was originally acquired in part with those monies. In terms of staff resources related to housing projects, we do have our housing and neighborhood specialists, and then of course the city attorney would be pretty involved as well. No specific action date for this item. We do have some alternatives up there for you. You could move this for more discussion depending on how you take this today. We can analyze or survey the neighborhood for some input. We could research the parkland demand. As I showed on there, we don't have any improved parkland in this area. We could look a little bit further into that in terms of, maybe if we don't do 8 acres, what if we did a 2-acre park? If we did a 3-acre park, and kind of look and see based on the population growth in that southern portion of the city, using our projections for how much parkland you want to have per citizen, and other calculations like that, we could bring that back for you. And then, of course, you can also direct us to start a rezone if you're really focused on the housing piece, and we would need a traffic impact analysis before we did that.
Thanks, Brad. It's interesting that we went in the course of just a few years there from setting aside money to develop the park to turning it around, and I'd be interested, I don't know if you were part of that PAVE process, but just more information about why the PAVE committee decided to declare it surplus. Like, was there a turning point? Or was it just kind of a lack of action on the park?
Yeah, I mean, I think Councilor Riker was a part of that. I know that there was 19 of those 42 properties that ended up being recommended to go into surplus, but I think each had its own unique piece to it.
Do you recall, Rick?
My recollection is that due to the housing crisis, we saw that as a viable piece. And we actually went out and physically toured the property and saw the potential for housing out there and felt that that was the recommendation, why we put a recommendation for surplus.
Thanks. Did you have a question too?
Yeah, Brad, I don't remember on the wetlands, was that delineated by the broad brush method, or were there actual test pits done out there to delineate the actual line for the wetlands?
No, I believe that the map that I showed earlier is based off of aerials and
Okay.
the broad, yeah.
And part of that question is that that area was, on the photo here, was quite substantial. And when we were physically out there walking on the land, while it may be declared wetlands per se, nothing really stood out to me as being wetlands, not saying it's not, but if we were to scrutinize it a little bit further, that may actually shrink. And the other thing I see is in the development, it could be considered that that wetland area be preserved as a park, so you could still have some form of park there, especially if the wetland was not, if it was usable. That's the other, would be the other criteria. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions for Brad? Go ahead, Val.
Yeah, can you tell me the couple things? Number one, highway. It's my understanding, and maybe Jason could clue us in, is that they do not want us to do any more accessing off of Highway 238. That I would say that the road access would need to probably come down Allenwood. Am I correct?
I won't say that that is an absolute, but it would be highly discouraged, my guess, from ODOT allowing another large connection off of, onto the highway. And especially because the property is connected to Allenwood, they would likely require that if you were doing anything short of just a single family house on this property, that you took your access off Allenwood. Right now, it does have a driveway cut to the highway,
Okay.
but I don't think you would get permission for a subdivision to connect here.
Okay, thank you. That was my thought too. And then I'm just kind of curious, down taking a look on that slide that shows the conservation buffer, what that piece of property that looks very busy to the south of that, is that just a business and a residence? I mean, I was just wondering if they had access off of Highway 238.
They do.
They do have it. Okay, so is that something that we could use as their access, just out of curiosity, just how that goes, if they had?
Well, you always have to go through the process of negotiation on those kinds of things. You know, if ODOT was to say absolutely not, you know, it kind of puts two adjacent property owners into that position where they need to talk together more. And, you know, it's not unheard of that an easement would be acquired. But it would be completely between, you know, those two property owners.
Okay, and I guess I was just wondering if it was a business or if it was a home. And I guess you can't tell from here.
It's a home.
It is a home, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was just kind of curious, what are all those little, they look like little cars all over there. What are those denoting?
These are elevation
Are they?
lines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I think that was my question.
Brian, then Rick.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So you gave us 3 back of the napkin scenarios that talk about the density potential. And you have on there the maximum number of units for each of those scenarios. I'm interested in what the minimum number of units might be for those scenarios. I know that you probably can't do that off the top of your head here, but I don't know that there's anything right now that's, necessarily going to push, since we don't have minimum density passed. The way we have things structured now, I'd be interested in knowing what the minimum build potential is there, just so we don't miss a opportunity here. And
Rick?
Well, just to
sorry,
add to
go ahead.
that, you do, I believe, have some control, you would have some control on what density levels are there. You could state, we're gonna do an RFP for the development of this property, and this is the density level. And define that level and
so similar to
incentivize.
Ramsey.
Yep.
Okay, great. I did have one other.
Or you could open it up just to the general market and say, hey, put it on MLS, it's for sale, and it could go to a developer, and they may do minimum density, and that's fine too, but I think with this, you're in the driver's seat with what you'd like to do with it.
Okay, great. My other question really quick was on the last, or next to last slide, it said, proceeds must go back to Parks Land Acquisition SDC Fund. And that's because this land was bought with those funds, and so if there's any proceeds, it has to go back to that fund. So what if we did something like Aaron just described, where we have an RFP and we solicit bids, and maybe we use the property as an incentive on the project, and there wasn't necessarily any proceeds? How would that work with them going back to that fund?
You would need to make the parks whole by still having a market assessment done on the property, and then therefore somewhere in the general fund, then whatever you're subsidizing, or through an affordable housing, if you're going to focus on not just density but affordable housing, depending on whatever you do, the parks would still need to be whole. So council could incentivize that property and reduce the market value by half, but that half that you've reduced would need to make the parks whole somehow, and it could be that you'd have to just come up with a general fund resource.
Thank you.
Rick?
Valerie, you mentioned the private driveway immediately to the south. I agree with Jason that my past experience has found that driveway would just be a private driveway for 2 or 3 vehicles. And as soon as you want to put an intersection in there for a subdivision, it's a whole different process. And because of my past experience, I would anticipate a very, I don't want to say next to impossible, but it could be next to impossible to get a new intersection there. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Valerie?
Yeah, I just have a question. When the property was bought from the point of view of putting in another reserve, park reserve, was Cathedral Hills factored in as a part of parks in that area?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It was purchased in 2005. The resolution that I found, didn't, or the background report didn't talk about that.
I wouldn't think from a parks master plan that Cathedral Hills was probably listed, because Cathedral Hills is not within our jurisdiction.
Okay.
That's just a community value, but when it comes to population densities and locations of population, and then the distribution of city parks, it was likely not considered and wouldn't be considered. I think today, if we were to do a master plan, we'd be looking at park infrastructure of the cities and matching it with those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
So if that parcel, or the large one anyway, was developed into a park, so the traffic impacts of the park are viewed how by ODOT? In other words, are you allowed access to Williams Highway for a park? Because, there would be obviously traffic impacts from a park. How would that be viewed?
Yeah, you're correct. They're going to look at the projected daily trips that are generated by whatever use is there. And we're going to use the Institute for Transportation Engineers manual, who says, based on this type of park, with this type of amenities, if you have a baseball field, it's going to factor one thing. If you only have a dog park, it's going to factor one. Or if you have 100 units, it's going to factor this way. So there's a formula, that's used to plug in. And then you get that projected number of trips that's going to be generated from that site. So ODOT want to see what that number is, and then, take a look at estimated turning movements and how does it affect them, which direction are people going to be headed. In this case, I'm guessing a vast majority are going to be headed, back up Williams Highway, so they'll probably look at that.
So we can end up with similar restrictions or similar red tape, whether it was a park or whether it was sold for development.
Yes.
Thank you.
From an ODOT perspective, if that, yeah.
Valerie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, are we in the discussion part of it yet, or no?
I think we're about there.
And I
Anybody
guess
have any questions? No, I think we're out of questions.
Okay, well, I guess this is my question. My question goes with this. I know happen to know that the land south of this is owned by a builder as well. So if we were to do our access down Allenwood and they had their access, could we put in access, or I guess you couldn't do that. I think I answered my own question, because you can't really, if you don't have them in on it, know what they're going to do with their land. So, okay, just forget it.
Brian?
We're in discussion, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I see this property as a really big opportunity for us to make a dent in the housing problem. And so I don't want us to run ourselves around in circles too much. I personally would, of the options that staff presented, I would direct staff to initiate the rezone and the TIA process for that property and to draft up an RFP. Just to get the ball rolling. We don't know what those details are going to look like yet, but I think personally we should provide staff that direction. And I would probably be in favor of, the development of mixed income housing out there as opposed to strictly affordable. I think that property would be well used for mixed income housing.
Joel?
So I was on the committee that recommended that to be surplus and used for housing, and there was a lot of support for that. And so I think we do need to move ahead. I think we also need to be sensitive to the wetlands and parks. The other interesting thing, the Parks Committee was looking at the larger parcel as in their master plan as a potential site for the aquatic center, which would be a much more developed service to the southern side of the city, in addition to the caveman pool that would be looked at about 10 years from now. There are other options out there. The YMCA was going to work with Road Community College and perhaps combine resources for an aquatic center, perhaps on site at Road Community College or some other place. And perhaps the city could, that's discussions for the future, who knows? But there are other options. So, to move ahead, I think is a good thing.
Val?
Yeah, I am in favor of moving forward as well. I think that having the Allen Creek Reserve out there close, having Cathedral Hills, having the golf club, even though it's private, it is greenery. I would be in favor of, maybe keeping for a neighborhood, somehow putting a neighborhood park perhaps on the wetlands, but I am in, and I also like Brian's idea of a mixed use, because I do think it would behoove us to have a little bit of both, so that it wasn't all affordable, but even would help with some of the housing for workforce development.
Vanessa?
This is a discussion that I internally struggle with because, as you know, I do have a strong stance on taking action on our housing crisis, but I also am an advocate for green space. And I struggle with this because Riverside Park was originally in our park reserve. And when that was purchased, it was outside of the city limits. So that was the city looking to future development in that area. So with that being said, I would support the PAVE Committee's recommendation for the surplus development on the property with the condition that they listed, which is to consider a lot line adjustment or deed restriction to retain the small portion on the main lot near the creek, which is the west end of the property in the wetland area, to keep some parks or open space on that part of the property. In addition, I do support staff moving forward with the rezone, the TIA, and to draft an RFP.
All right. Brian?
I just had a question maybe for Brad. I know when we just last year talked about the Allen Creek rezone, we sent it to Housing Committee to get them to give recommendations on that. Is that something we should be doing for this, or is it different in some way?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think it kind of the degree that I think council would like to have citizen committee input. I mean, it is different in the sense that it's much smaller. You know, the Allen Creek area is about 62 acres, and there's multiple opportunities to do some, you know, granular things with that much acreage and working around with it. They wouldn't be able to make, you know, any decisions without a formal application in front of them, but we're certainly happy to take and get some feedback if you'd like that.
I don't know that it seems necessary, particularly on this one, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, the comprehensive plan to do anything above the low density, meaning that, you know, that R18 level of density, sort of, you know, around that 7 units per acre, is going to require changing the comprehensive plan, which will be, there's going to be some nuance to that. I'll just say that because of the way that our code is currently written, and in order to change the comprehensive plan, you have to meet certain findings. And one of those does, in a broad way, deal with compatibility with the area. There are no other high-density designated properties currently in the comprehensive plan in that whole area. You know, it's an analysis that has to go through, and that may be, to get to your first question, Councilor, you know, one of the benefits to, you know, to getting feedback from the, you know, from the other committees. I mean, it takes time. It took us about two and a half months to get you the feedback last time, because of the committee dates and getting it onto their agendas. But that would probably be the number one question that I would pose to them, would be around that comprehensive plan change.
Okay, I think Housing Committee might appreciate having this brought to them just to see if they do have any input on it. Not that they will, but I think it's very housing related, and so maybe Housing Committee should chime in.
Also very parks related, potentially. I don't know. Are you interested in having committee input, or?
I almost feel the parks part of it is as important as the housing part. So for them to look at the master plan and get their perspective. But yeah, it's not going to hurt. I want to go back and explore just a minute with what you said, Brad, because I don't completely understand it. So you're saying that if we change any of the density from what it is right now, it will have to go back through the comprehensive plan, or is that only the highest density? Can you clarify? So
it's currently low.
Right.
And to go to the medium or high, either one of those would change the comprehensive plan designation. So yes, to go to anything above
what it currently
that 7 or so dwelling units per acre density.
Okay. So if we had it, I mean, this is just off, if we had it at the current one, if a builder were to go in there, could they go in there with duplexes and triplexes on the lots and automatically increase it, or how does that work? Now that change has been made?
So the duplexes are definitely allowed under the R18. Then with a planned unit development, you can also do the tris, but you're still not going to be able, no matter what, your total density, you could do a combination of, you know, maybe get triplexes on a couple lots here and a duplex over here or two, but your overall density is not going to be able to exceed that max.
Okay, the one that is set. Okay.
If council's goal is to ultimately to provide for additional housing, and you are concerned about the density, you may want to go for that middle density zone, because it's not as big of an impact to the neighboring surrounding properties. It may be better to be able to put into the comp plan, and then if you're concerned about the level of density within that zone, then you may want to do take more of a lead on what type of development is going to be there and require a certain amount of density based on that zone.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, well, it sounds like there's a strong interest in using a good portion of this property for housing. But do you want feedback from your committees? Do you want, yes, I'm seeing Vanessa and Valerie and Brian, Rick saying yes. Okay. So Housing and Parks Committee? Okay. Let's hear what they have to say, and then we'll come back at this in a couple of months. All right. What are we doing? We're doing a, do we have to do agenda review before the special meeting? I see we do. Okay, let's do an agenda review real quick. Next week's workshop, we have interviewing some candidates for the Historic Building and Sites Commission as well as Budget Committee. Do we have candidates? Is that ready to go? Yes. Okay, and then hearing from our new destination marketing organization about their annual business plan, as well as talking about the scope of Caveman Plaza Task Force. Everybody good with that? Aaron?
Would council like us to reach out to the Board of Commissioners at Cave Junction to also be present, or to see if they'd like to be present for the Destination Marketing Organization report, as they sort of are, the county is sort of a player also with the DMO and Cave Junction, and in essence also from a spirit of what they're trying to do?
I would just say, I went to the last board meeting for the destination marketing, and at that time Darren was there, and he did ask that they be there because it sure saves time on Tori's part to have to give the same presentation twice. So I think that would be very wise to do that.
Okay, so you would be inviting them to have a joint meeting or just to be audience members at our meeting?
I guess that'd be further clarification. If we just had one Board of Commissioner and then one Cave Junction person, it would just be your meeting. If we had a quorum of the Board of Commissioners, then we'd want to try to set up a joint meeting, and based on your intent of what you'd like, we could try to schedule a joint meeting, or we could just ask that one Board of Commissioner representative be present.
I think we kind of had that discussion at the meeting, and at this point it was kind of like, since Darren is the person who's involved for this meeting, it would just be inviting him to be at the meeting. In the future, we talked about the fact that we needed to get back to those joint meetings of both, because the CDC is also a committee of both, and it would be those times we could kind of consolidate and make the things that we have in common, we could stick them all in one meeting. But for this one, since it's already been scheduled, it's just a lot easier to just invite Darren, I think.
Okay. Well, obviously, they're always welcome to come, so if you wanted to send them a specific invite, that would be fine. Did you have something, Rick? No? I thought your hand was up a minute ago. No? Joel? Oh, Rob?
So we talked about on the agenda having the parameters for the Town Center Plaza discussion. I'm wondering what about choosing the task force members? When would that be? When would that be happening? I'd hate to see this, having to be one step and then a second drawn out step and a third drawn out step. If we could kind of be doing them at the same time, when will we be choosing or interviewing the task force? I'd like to see that sooner rather than later. Aaron, is it correct that the deadline is already over as far as the applications have come in for the task force?
It was this Friday? It was that, yeah, so it is. So yeah, we're at a point now where we can forward you the applications.
Okay.
So if that's something you're wanting to add to the discussion on the Caveman Plaza Task Force to review applications or something along those lines, you can too, or we can just forward the applications to appoint membership to a business meeting.
Well, typically we don't necessarily discuss applications, we just look at them privately and then at some meeting we appoint, right?
Yeah, so we can have that appointment at the February 2nd meeting if you'd like.
I would like it as soon as is reasonable, I would like it. So.
Okay, well, we just had the deadline on Friday, so did you want to talk about it Monday or just go to a business meeting?
Well, I don't think that we necessarily talk about applications right?
Okay.
We review them on our own, and then we,
Normally,
that
it's
night
not
and
part
vote.
of a workshop, yeah,
right.
unless there's interviews.
Good point. So do we want to interview? I think we should probably interview personally. So I think we should interview at a workshop.
Okay, well, I think at this point, just for next Monday, we'll just talk about the scope of the committee, and then we can
Do the interviews.
also address what we want to do with the interviews.
Yeah, makes sense.
Val, did you have something, or Joel
No.
did, one of you?
I was just going to say that it seems to me that the task force is a pretty big task force. I mean, here on that next meeting, we're appointing COPA, HPSC, CEDC, budget members. So it kind of seems like it would be better off to give ourselves the options of interviewing if we needed to after we see the number, and then have it actually approved on the February 16th meeting.
Okay, is there, we're just not quite there yet. I think we need to talk about Monday. We'll talk about the scope of the task force, and we can also talk about what to do with the applicants at that time. Brian?
While we're on the point of task forces, is the application still open for the sustainability task force, or is that closed?
It's closed.
That is closed, and we'll be getting those applications to you shortly. I was just making myself a note based on this conversation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Joel, did you have something? No. Nope. Okay. Anything else to add at this point? I think Joel and I are probably meeting this Wednesday, right, for an agenda review, and we'll
Right.
have a look at strategic priorities and different things.
I did have an additional topic, and it doesn't have to be put on any particular date that I'd like to bring up. And that's the need to schedule a seminar to look at the future of homelessness with the key members in Grants Pass. We can do it after the urban campground discussion. It's not to hold up any particular project, but it is to build an even better consensus as we move towards the future. And one urban campground is just one step of that. So anyway, I'd like to put that on the agenda. We have an opportunity it doesn't cost us any money to have a consultant come in and give us an example of what's been done across the nation on homelessness, and he's willing to come free. And then after that, we can make a decision whether we want to go further or not.
I just have a question and clarification on that, Joel. When they come in and we're talking about the building consensus, who is a part of that consensus? Who are the sort of people that will be a part of it? Is it just council members, or can you?
You know, that's determined by us. Where I've been involved with in the past, it would be people like Doug from Foundry Village. It would be Rogue Retreat. It would be probably a homeless person. Some of the people that have spoke with passion at our meetings. You know, when you look at building a community where we solve things together and make things even better and move forward. It's designed to increase community cohesion and our ability to work together.
So clarification then, it's basically a community building operation, so you're bringing in specific members to sit down and have a consensus.
It's generally, it's a focused discussion, generally not open to the public. You know, we could have it in whatever way if people wanted to watch it as a, what do you call that? We have
Webinar.
a group of people discuss it in the middle and the other people can watch.
Like a panel discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a panel, it's a participation. It's a circle. It's the same process we used on the pool. I did it with a small group. A charrette?
Charrette.
Okay. So anyway, I'd just like to put it on the agenda. We don't need to discuss it at this point in time. We can discuss it at that time.
So you're asking to put the discussion about whether or not to have one on the agenda?
No, I'm proposing that we put it on the agenda. That's my proposal.
Put what on the agenda? The
That
actual
we
seminar?
propose, that we propose to discuss bringing a consultant and taking up on his free offer to demonstrate to us how this could be used as we move forward and explore the issue of homelessness in our community.
Okay. Brian, did you have something on that topic?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
just wondering, is this something that can happen outside of council? I don't know particularly why council needs to be involved in this. It seems like something that can happen with the community and the players at hand, independent of what our actions are.
You know, it's up to council. So we could put that on the agenda. We don't need to make a decision now. If there's 2 other people that support it, we'll put it on the agenda, and if there's not, we won't.
Okay, council, do you, is anybody interested in having something added to the agenda?
Yes.
Valerie?
Oh, yeah, I was just raising my hand to show support because I do think it's just an example of a forum that gives us a consultant that helps us as a community go through this discussion, and I do think it needs to be outside of just council. So I like the idea because I think if you specifically invite people in who are involved in it, it gives fodder for a good discussion and building consensus within the community.
Okay, I have to say, I'm still not sure what the ask is of what we're putting on the agenda. Are you asking the council to talk about how to do something like this, or whether we want to do something like this? Or are you actually asking?
So basically what I'm asking for is permission to have this consultant come over free and show us what the process looks like before we decide we want to implement it. And I don't want to do that unilaterally and abuse any power that I have. I want to do it with the consent of the council.
So it sounds like what it would be is, would it be a workshop then for discussion of a consensus building with regards to the unhoused issues in Grants Pass, and the consultant would come and talk to the council first just to talk about process?
Yeah, whether consensus occurs or not, that would be a goal, but it would be to explore the issue with the different aspects of the community. And it's the whole issue, not just one project.
But I think what we're trying to get at, Joel, is that the first ask is to have the consultant come and explain what he'll do.
Yeah.
And at that point, we make the decision.
And it wouldn't cost us anything. He'd actually give us a demonstration. So what he has offered to do is come and give us a demonstration of what it would be like. And it doesn't cost us anything.
Okay, so the ask is to have a workshop with this consultant where they would tell us more about this plan.
Right. Well, and I'm not sure the workshop would be him coming. What I was asking for was permission to get him to come, and that could be another workshop. But I didn't want to contact him without the consent of the council. So really what I'm looking for is at this workshop that you give me permission to go ahead and have him come and give that free demonstration to us, and then we can decide whether we want to proceed further with it or not. I don't want to go out and do that independently of the council.
Okay, I think I've got it. So Valerie, were you supporting that? And was
Yes.
there other council support for doing that? Yes, Robin, Rick, okay. And I think Aaron had kind of a summary of what we're doing there. No, I mean, you don't need to repeat it, but I think we've got it. Okay, anything else? Brian?
So I know one of the things that we were hoping to come out of our planning this year was to streamline our meetings, to not have extra things that maybe aren't pertinent to our goals. And a piece of that was, I know a couple people brought up the fact that, there's this mechanism we have where if 3 people support something, it automatically gets put on a meeting, like what just happened just now. So is that mechanism, we didn't really talk about it, and this might not be the appropriate time to talk about it, but I think that we need to talk about if that 3 counselor thing is something we want to continue in the hopes of keeping our meetings streamlined this year so we can be effective.
Aaron?
Then maybe add some additional context to that. That's a great point that the council brought up. We have, we'll be presenting to you the outcome of the strategic plan, and I'll talk to the council president and the mayor on when they'd like to have that scheduled. We'll be ready to go anytime. But with that presentation, we'll also go through the parking lot items that were mentioned and review those and figure out when you want to deal with some of those challenges. And I think that was one of the parking lot items that was talked about. And so at that point for sure, unless council wants to take this on individually right now, you'll have an opportunity to say, okay, yeah, let's do this, let's workshop this, let's memo this, let's take action on this or whatever.
Yeah, I would definitely, if it's not in the parking lot, I would put it in the parking lot for that. Okay.
I think it is.
Okay, are we done with agenda review today? Brian, did you have something?
I was going to adjourn us into,
Okay, please do.
I don't know what to say, but I adjourn the workshop and move that we convene the special Urban Renewal Agency board meeting.
Thank you. Second from Valerie. All in favor of adjourning the workshop and reconvening as URA?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned as city council and